Hi.
Hi.
Okay, now I got my face on. Hi, this is Leah Can. I'm a trustee of the Hope Funds for Cancer Research. I want to welcome everybody to the Women in Science annual panel. It's Brave New World. We're doing this virtually, obviously all in a lot of different places. Forgive me for talking through a mask, but I am here at Command Central where we're running the meeting, and there are a few of us in the room, so we need to be masked up. I know everyone is currently getting on, and certainly I see Alessandra and Johanna. I think we're still waiting for a couple of participants, but everybody's on? Okay, then I'm going to turn this over to Andrew. Did you want to make an introduction?
Hi, everyone. Thanks for coming. My name is Andrew Mullen. I'm a former Hope Funds Fellow, and it's my pleasure to moderate our discussion today on women in science. And as Leah said, I'm at the Tennis Hall of Fame in Newport, and we're joined by 4 fantastic guests. So it's an honor for me to introduce Dr. Joan Bruby. She's the director of the Harvard Ludwig Cancer Center and professor of cell biology at Harvard Medical School. Welcome, Joan. We also have Dr. Johanna Withers. She's a former Hope Funds Fellow and currently a principal scientist at Cypher Medicine in Cambridge. Welcome.
Hello, thank you.
Next, we have Dr. Alessandra Dalgassi. I hope I pronounced your last name correctly. It's close. She's a current Hope Funds Fellow in the lab of Dr. Rick Young at the Whitehead Institute. Welcome.
Thank you so much.
And last, we have Miss Camille Schreier. She's the 2020 Miss America and currently pursuing her Doctor of Pharmacy from Virginia Commonwealth University. So welcome to you all.
Thank you.
And I'd like to kick off our discussion by asking each of you to please share what led you to pursue a career in science, and also briefly tell us about your current research. And Camille, why don't you start?
Absolutely. So I actually get this question all the time because I am kind of known as the scientist Miss America. It's kind of the way I've branded myself, and I think it was what helped me win my job as Miss America this year. So I did a whole science demonstration on stage, and so people want to know, why do I love science so much? And quite honestly, it was something that started as a child for me. I was always exposed to nature, to the idea of science from the earliest age that I can remember. And whether or not that was literally cooking and baking in my kitchen with my family and understanding that that was chemistry and biology happening, or I was gardening in my yard and I knew that, you know, we put these seeds in the ground and they turn into plants, and that's this biological process, that I was aware of that. And so as I got older, I had so many different interests of things that I loved about science, and I couldn't really choose what career I wanted to do. So I had a lot of different ideas, but I ended up loving biology and chemistry the most and doing an undergraduate degree in biochemistry. I then had the opportunity to intern with a pharmaceutical company and understood how pharmacists could really make a difference within the pharmaceutical industry in a way that I didn't really understand. So I'm now pursuing a doctor of pharmacy, and so I'll be a pharmacist after I am done. But of course, right now I'm not in the middle of my studies. I had to take some time off to do this job as Miss America. So I'm not currently conducting any research, but I think that what I am conducting is kind of a survey of how people perceive women scientists in society, literally, as I go around and I talk about being a woman in science. And I'm inspiring kids across the country to hopefully do the same and pursue a career in STEM. So that's a little bit about my love, and I'm a self-professed science nerd, and I'm totally fine that everyone knows that.
Well, you're in good company here. So Alessandra, why don't you go next?
Yeah, so first I would like to thank for the invitation to be part of this panel with such talented women. Also for me, my passion for biomedical, kind of biomedical research started when I was a little kid. As a little girl, I knew in my own way what pain was, and I hated it. I hated every second of it. I didn't want it for myself, nor for anybody else. So early on, I decided that my life goal would be to defeat diseases. And this matched very well with what I discovered later to be passion to study science. I will spend every day very happy to study math, biology, chemistry, physics. And so this matched very well and led me to a career in biomedical science, in the biomedical sciences. Now I'm a postdoc at the Whitehead Institute under the supervision of Rick Young, and I'm Parks Hope Funds Fellow, which I'm very honored to be. In the Young Lab, what we study are the molecular mechanisms of diseases, in particular cancer. So we study cells, which are the building blocks of the human body, and cells have specific jobs to do. And they're very smart. To do the jobs they have to do, they know they have to be compartmentalized in little compartments that we call organelles. And all organelles have specific functions. When they go crazy, those can lead to extra proliferation in cancer. So what we do, we study the function of these little organelles that we call condensates. We understand what causes them to go crazy and lead to cancer, so that we can figure out how to block it and cure patients that have cancer.
Thank you so much. Johanna, we'd love to hear from you.
Wonderful. Yeah, so my love of science and love of research started a little bit later. It wasn't my childhood, it was more when I was an undergrad. So I did my undergraduate work in Canada, and the university of that, you do a more generalized scientific first year where you get exposed to everything chemistry, biology, physics. And from there, you have this base understanding of all the different fields, and you specialize in your second year. And in that second year, I started working in a molecular biology lab, and I caught that research bug. I fell in love with doing the research and discovering things that nobody else in the world knew, that you were the first one to discover this new knowledge and being able to communicate that to other people. And I never looked back after that. I was addicted. I went and did my PhD work at Johns Hopkins. I went and did postdoctoral work with John Stites at Yale, and I loved every minute of it. And a year ago, I changed from doing academic research and joined a small biotech startup just outside of Boston. And there I am their principal scientist. So this company called Cypher Medicine, we use machine learning and network science to develop diagnostic tests that predict response to targeted therapies in autoimmune diseases. And we have a phenomenal team of data scientists. But in my role, I take the work that they are doing to develop and identify molecular signatures in individual patients that predict response. And I lead both the clinical utility and the scientific pipeline that helps translate this work to the clinic, and helping to work at all the different sides. So working with the marketing team to make sure that this is communicated to physicians, that we have these tools, working with insurance companies and medical directors at insurance companies so that this test gets covered, and really helping any aspect that they need to really get this work out and helping patients.
Thank you for sharing that. I'm looking forward to hearing more about your industry experience in a couple minutes. And so Joan, I'd love to hear from you. Oh, looks like you're muted.
Okay, so it's important to understand that when I was starting college, it was somewhat the dark ages for women in science. And basically, if you were an academically inclined girl with an interest in science, you were directed in either of two directions, either to be a high school teacher and teach science, or to be a nurse if you were kind of interested in life sciences and medicine. So I entered Northwestern, where I went to college, as a math major, planning on being a high school math teacher. But then as a sophomore, my sister was diagnosed with a glioblastoma. She was a year older than I was. And basically that just changed my life. I went on a mission at that time to figure out, how could what causes cancer? How could someone so young be subjected to what she went through? And I asked the neurosurgeon when he was in the room with my sister, what was known about cancer, the causes of cancer. And he said that there was beginning to be some evidence, and this was in the late 60s, that viruses may cause cancer. So I went back to Northwestern and did a independent study reading the literature about viruses and cancer. And basically it opened up a world to me that I had never never seen before, and that is that of experimental research, forming hypotheses, testing them. And that's when I got hooked, and I was lucky to do a summer internship at Jackson Labs where I actually got to do research, and basically there's been no turning back. So I got addicted, and I've had a wonderful career, not without hardship certainly, but a wonderful career. And now I'm still doing cancer research, and most of our research is on understanding what causes resistance to cancer therapy so we could improve the outcome of patients, and then also what are the earliest changes in women who have mutations that cause a predisposition to cancer. What are the earliest changes in breast tissues, using a variety of different single cell approaches to find those small number of changes that are a small number of cells that are altered before a tumor develops.
Thank you so much. And so I'd like to ask Ali and Camille to share your experience as women scientists in training. Has there been anything that's concerned you or limited your work in the lab? And maybe Camille, you can start.
Yeah, I feel really lucky. And when I hear Joan kind of tell me her background of how it was when she started pursuing a career in STEM or in science, I always remember how grateful I am for the fact that I have not faced a lot of adversity as a woman in STEM at this point in my career, especially in the pharmacy profession now, which is actually primarily female, which is really wonderful to then see. And so I've had the opportunity to do research in undergrad alongside other female PIs that I worked under. So I was always really celebrated as a woman in STEM. I did have one high school chemistry teacher, I always like to share this story, who, funny enough, I love chemistry, but it was not always my best subject in school, which I think is also a misconception about those of us who are interested in science, that we're like amazing at every single piece of the subject, and that, you have to be an expert at every piece of what you do. But so I was in my high school chemistry class, did okay in it. But so I would always try to answer questions in class. I was always that kid who would put my hand up, and I finally got a question right one day, and my high school chemistry teacher looked at me and said, even a squirrel, or even a blind squirrel, gets a nut sometimes. And I was like, okay, now, I don't know if you would have said that to my male colleagues. So that was probably the only time that I really had faced that. So I'm very grateful that I have really felt like I've had the opportunity and platform to be able to be successful as a woman in science.
Yeah, I also have to admit that I've always had very supportive family members, although non-scientists. They say, you want to pursue a career in science, just go ahead. And as well as had always very supportive mentors, lab mates, and collaborators. So I feel very fortunate and grateful for all the fightings the previous women did, so that to make things easier now for women nowadays. And I know we still have to do some more work, but I think they have done a great job, and I'm very thankful to that. Having said that, I had some experiences in which I was in my early 20s, and a professor came to me and he said, I don't like you. I'll never had anybody like you in my lab.
Wow.
And so I was very surprised because he didn't know anything about me. We never talked before. So he just looked at me and just came and, told me he's very explicit biased against me. And then, I couldn't take it personal at that time because we really had no interaction. So I knew it wasn't coming from me, it was coming from something that he had, that happened probably to him in his mind. And so the way that I dealt with it, it wasn't one of my supervisors or anybody, so it wasn't directly affecting my career. But the way I dealt with it, I was just true to myself. I'm a passionate, hardworking scientist, so I continued my life. And then afterwards, he came to me and he apologized, and he said he doesn't believe anymore anything that he told me. And actually I could see that he started to hire people that had the same characteristics that he didn't like about me. So this lesson taught me that by being the best example that I can possibly be as a scientist, that I may help people get over some of their biases that they may have. And so, yes, one thing that I noticed I have to work on is communication. So something that I recently discovered, because sometimes I couldn't get my point across with certain people. And I realized by studying that the men and women have different style of communication. So what I'm doing now to try to overcome that and be better at expressing my ideas and get my point across is by learning different styles of communication so I can adapt my way of communicating with people to accomplish the goal or actually have an effective communication. And I think that will be something very important, especially as we deal with different communication styles between men and women. That's something I have encountered, at least.
Thank you for sharing that. And so, Joanna, I'd like to put the same question to you and also ask you to contrast it with your time in academic, having recently transitioned to industry. Has there been anything that's concerned you or limited your work in industry?
No, I mean, thus far I've found that the community that I found at Cypher Medicine has been very supportive, and the split of men and women within our scientific team is actually almost 50-50. With the three major leaders in the scientific team, we're all female. So myself and two other women. And when I was coming and then told them that, you know, I was offered this opportunity to join this Hope Funds panel again to speak about women in science, they were actually really excited internally at Cypher, because they acknowledged that one of our biggest strengths internally is our diversity on our scientific team, both in terms of gender, but also in terms of our backgrounds. And, you know, we have a very international team, and they felt like that was something they hadn't promoted yet, but something they really valued internally. So I've been very happy and very supported in my new position. And this has continued also from my academic career, where I really sought out both mentors and colleagues who were also very supportive. And you know, even if there were times when, you know, you might have encountered people who might have made comments that were inappropriate, I surrounded myself by women and men who were willing to stand up and speak up when people made inappropriate comments. Things even, you know, about being a woman, or things that might have been dripping with innuendo. You know, there were instances when that happens, and people stood up and spoke against that. So I think we've made great strides and have come a long way from even when Joan was starting.
That's great. And I'd like to now ask you, Joan, I was interested to hear that when you were coming up in college, the stereotype was of women going to science to become teachers, and you defied that stereotype. So I'd like to, one, ask you, how did you do it, and what advice would you give to Camille, Ali, and Johanna as they continue their careers?
So when I was in graduate school, I had made the decision that I was going to be a research associate instead of a lab director or assistant professor. And the decision was made kind of based on where I came from. You know, there was no woman in my family that ever did anything except stay home with the kids. And so I felt like I could avoid a conflict between, you know, or maybe avoid the guilt of making choices about my responsibilities as a mom versus responsibilities as a scientist. And no one believes that now, because obviously, you know, that didn't happen. But I think that just in terms of thinking about advice, that what happened was that when I was after my second year postdoc, I had a son, my child, a son. And what I found was that, you know, it seemed to work out okay, that I didn't have to be home every minute, and Sean seemed to be developing well in a healthy way. And then I just got completely immersed in my research project. And I was lucky enough to make a discovery that opened up a whole world, you know, to me and to other people. And so basically I couldn't wait to follow up on that. So I thought, well, I'll just try it out as an assistant professor. And then basically just took took each step as I went along. Is this working? Is this not working? And it, it seemed to always be working, even though, there were hardships and things like that. But I think that there are a lot of women who have kind of dropped out of the main, like academics or even, kind of more serious industry jobs. They look at what I'm doing now, for instance, and they say, there's no way I can do that. I'm not capable. And I think one should never look too many rungs up the ladder as a role model. You need to look at one rung up and see, oh, how's she doing? Like an assistant professor or someone like Joanna, and say, how's this work? Get advice from them, but basically take baby steps and don't underestimate your potential. I think, I just didn't think I was capable of handling it all. And, you just need to try it out, because I think one thing great about being a woman scientist is that it's not an embarrassment, or you don't have to be shamed if you decide that's not what you want. Men don't have that option. A lot of men, that they have to be the breadwinners, they have to be successful. But, it's a funny way of looking at it, but it is something that we have the kind of the option of testing things out, see how it goes. So I guess, my advice would be to just take each step as it goes and see how it works for you.
That's great to hear. And maybe continue on that line for myself and everyone else in the audience, especially the men. Do you have advice for how we can avoid implicit bias about women in science careers? Maybe, Joan, I'll give that to you first.
Well, one thing that I've noticed is that, in many cases, women are the same way, but males like interacting with males. They're used to it. They did it all through all the sports and they just had best friends that are men. And so it's a little bit, and women can be the same way. But I think one of the things I've noticed is when I'm in like a board meeting or something like that, where there's very few women and lots of men, it's just more difficult to be, for the men to ask for the opinion of women. And, I tend to kind of get more shy under those circumstances. And so I think one thing is to, try to be aware of unconscious biases in not, it's not a really negative thing. It's just something you're more comfortable with. Be sure to include women more, or, solicit opinions, because I think in general, it's not true for all women at all, but I think in general, we tend to retract a bit more. And so that could be true in study sections, in project team meetings in industry. I also was the scientific director and a founder of a biotech company. So I also, had the experience with that and kind of see the same kind of thing. So just kind of trying to be aware of the dynamics of interactions.
Yeah, and then to echo that, I think that's really important, because that's something that I struggle with, and I noticed it's something that some of the women in our company have struggled with, is really advocating for yourself. Mm-hmm. Right? There's a lot of women that we've worked with, and they feel like if they work really hard and they keep their head down and they don't ruffle the waters, that somebody will notice their accomplishments and they'll be rewarded for it. Yeah. And it's really not the case. So, being able to recognize and call out people's accomplishments when they happen, and really celebrating everybody's accomplishments. And then there's another situation, and you reminded me of something that I encountered. So I got invited to discuss, our work for our company at a panel, and it was a lot of physicians and medical directors and really high-ranking people. And I came in, and I was one of two women in the room. And when we first came in, you could sit wherever you wanted, and you sat down, and it was a U shape. The next day we came in, it was a 2-day event. They had taken the two women and moved our name tags to the end of the U. And that second day, neither me nor the other women were able to get a word in edgewise, because you had this panel of men now, on the other side of the room, and it was difficult to interject and get your opinion heard. And again, at the end of that, I kicked myself for not advocating and saying, I'm gonna, hi, George, Sam, Paul, I'm gonna, come and sit beside you today. I really enjoyed talking to you yesterday. And just picking up my name tag and moving because I recognized it and the woman beside me recognized it. And we came in the second day that we were moved together in the corner of the room. And it's those small things and recognizing that and advocating for yourself, it can be very, very difficult.
Alessandra, Camille, I'd love to hear your thoughts as well.
Yes, so along those lines, I completely agree. And so maybe what I will suggest something extra is something that I do. Like I like sports, American sports, like a lot of American football and baseball. And I am part of the Whitehead softball team, in which is basically all men and 2 women, which is very intimidating. But starting from when you're young to be able to be in a situation when you have to allow with a lot of men, and then how to communicate with them is very useful. So then you continue, it's gonna be very useful because it's fun for the game as well as in your career when you have to interact with men. And then another thing that I do for myself, because I think probably everybody has some unconscious bias. And what I do that I'm learning now in the Young Lab, so basically in the Young Lab, we get to lead a small team, and I'm a team leader. And my goal is, of course, to do science, but I have basically under my umbrella, I have all these wonderful scientists. And my goal for them is that they have to get what they need. I have to give them what they need. I have to make sure they reach their full potential. I have to make sure they are happy. If all these 3 things I've learned with Rick Young's supervision are met, then the science is just a good consequence of it. And so but I'm learning, I'm just starting all these leadership training as a postdoc. And so what I always do is I try to study and every time analyze my actions towards these people. Did I reach the goal? How were they? Were they happy? Were they unhappy? What did I do? Why did I do what I did? Is it because, if it's something bad, is it because I have a bias, an unconscious bias? And so if I do find if I have an unconscious bias, why do I have it? So I go through as much as I can after every meeting, every interaction. At the end of the day, I try to go through all these analyses that helps me understand how I am, and if I have some biases, then I know, I'm aware, and then I can work to make sure there's something that I will kind of eliminate them.
That's really interesting.
And to echo that, I agree. And I think that it's part of the thing that I also notice, I think, is that sometimes as women, we assume that we're going to be treated differently in certain situations because we might be the only woman in a room. But it's important that when we enter that kind of a room to assume that we are going to be treated equally and come out with that same kind of confidence that every other man in the room really has. And I think that's number one important for us women. But kind of to go back to your original question, Andrew, in how can other people, men, be able to work through those unconscious biases? I think it's important to identify them, number one, and especially in the world right now when we're talking so much about diversity in more than just gender, understanding that so many people have different backgrounds and valuing the difference in perspective that other people do have. And you might have that identification of, okay, I don't know if this person is going to be the person I'm looking for, but they might have a completely different perspective than anyone else on my team. So that is valuable for me to bring onto my team, because that person could have something that really breaks open what we're doing and looks at it with a different lens. So I think that's always something I think is important in any type of employment, that kind of diversity piece. And that's why it's always important to have a lot of diverse representation on different teams.
Camille, I'd also be curious to ask you, you have a great platform for promoting science. When you talk to young women and girls, are they surprised that you're a scientist? Are things changing for young kids now that it is different based on what you think?
Yes, and so, I think that we've made so much progress, number one. And thank you to all women who have come before me in STEM. But I absolutely, I was talking to some of the women before we started, and I walk into schools many times, and the girls especially think that I'm a princess, and they see the princess come into their classroom because I have a crown on. And I always like to ask them what they think I do for my job. And I always get like, oh, you're a princess, you're a model, you're all these things. And I always do that intentionally because I want to see what they think I do. And then I tell them that I studied science and that I love science. And then then I bring a science demonstration to their school and we talk about science for the rest of the time. So there is still a perception. Now, the fact that I have a crown on my head also leads to some of these things. So spoiler, that also is a little variable that sometimes doesn't always happen. But I think a lot of people are shocked when I say that that is what I love and that I study, especially in this role. Even from adults are a little surprised. Like, and I even had a reporter one time who asked me right after I won Miss Virginia, she's like, you're a graduate student in science. Why do you want to compete in a beauty pageant? And I'm like, it's not a beauty pageant anymore. I'm like, I literally am paying for my graduate education through being Miss America. I've won almost $80,000 of scholarship money. And so people don't necessarily realize that. So I think it's a really great opportunity for me as Miss America through the platform that I have to really redefine what it means to not only be Miss America, but for women scientists to see that they don't have to choose between femininity and being a scientist. You can do both of those things and they can be celebrated together.
That's so cool. Thank you for sharing that. In the last couple minutes here, we're running right up against our time, but I'd just be curious to know from each of you very briefly, like how you think we can continue to change the stereotypes, what can be done to continue women in science. So Joan, I'd love to hear from you again.
You know, I think someone like Camille can have so much influence because she is just a picture of beauty as well as brains, and she can let women know that it's really appealing and exciting to be in science. I think they don't get that message very much. So Camille, thanks so much for doing that. I'm so glad that you were chosen.
Thank you.
And I think that it is important for us to try to reach out to younger women, to get that message out too, you know, to participate more in more high school programs. It's interesting, when I was invited to join to be a founding member of the Rosalind Franklin Society, which was a society for women scientists. And at the first dinner, they asked each one of us to make a statement, and I was like the 27th of 28 women to make a statement. So everything had been said. And I asked the question, how many of you went to an all-girls school? And the answer was interesting. It's like, I think all but about 3 women raised their hand. And so again, you know, when I was growing up in science, the women that seemed to be successful were those that went to an all-girls school where they never even thought about that there was something that they couldn't do and weren't subject to the bias. So I think, you know, again, this unconscious bias, just being as aware as possible for women and for men at how important it is to make every opportunity available to women and to make young women understand what a great career it can be, and how they can overcome, you know, what are reasonable barriers to overcome.
Thank you, and I'd love to open that up to the rest of you as well to answer.
Yeah, so I think that you brought up an interesting point, that these girls, when they're growing up, they don't know what's not possible. And yeah. I saw that, so I have a 5-year-old daughter, and I saw that with her too, because she loves science. She loves bugs. She finds them everywhere in the yard. She collects them. She has a little microscope. She puts them in containers. And somebody once said to her, you know, you can be a scientist too. It's not just for boys. And it had never occurred to her that she wouldn't have been allowed to because she was a girl. And just that one sentence put so much doubt. You could see it, like this loss of innocence, this loss of hope, where she thought, why would somebody think that I couldn't be? And as a parent, as a mom, as a woman in science, that was crushing. And so I think we need to also be conscious of the words that we use as we're bringing these girls up, because like she's 5 and it started already.
Wow.
And I'm going to follow that because I am so often interacting with those 5-year-olds who look at me, and I want to normalize the fact that they don't have to, you know, that I do science, they can love science, and we talk about it, and that they have an older role model to look toward. And you're doing that for your daughter as well, just by the career that you're in, and continuing to just make that normal also for little boys. And so that's the other thing that's interesting in my role, because I'm not always with just little girls. And so to show also little boys that it is totally normal and cool for girls to be scientists too, so that they grow up to be men who are really accepting of women in science in the same way. Because sometimes I get put in situations because they think that I only want to be around the little girls, but it's also equally as important to inspire the young men to be equal supporters of women in STEM, because they are also part of that overarching community. So that's another thing I think that we absolutely need to work on moving forward as well.
Yeah, I completely agree with what everybody has said. Actually, my experience as a young girl was, I had no idea scientists existed. So to me, if there wasn't like the idea of, or I'm a woman, I cannot be a scientist. I didn't even know that as a 5-year-old, I had no clue. I could hear some, but mostly were about dead scientists. So for me, it was not something that existed. So I think what I would like to do, and what I'm doing is, as much as I can, is to go to high school. So far it's been high school, but I would like to go down, as Camille is doing, junior high school, elementary school, kindergarten, and show them how much science is fun, and they can be superheroes by being scientists. I would like to see a next superhero movie with a scientist that saves the world for kids. But I agree. Support, go show as an example of women that have been successful, that are successful, and will be even more successful in the future. And make sure that boys and girls communicate and support each other. It's very important. And be aware of our own biases, so that we can be aware of our own biases, so that they won't compromise our interactions in other people's lives.
Thank you so much. I think we're going to open it up to questions if there are any, and I know we have one from Leah, so I'll let her ask her question.
Thank you, Andrew. So I'm going to change the subject just a little bit, but thinking about women's careers, in fact, all scientists' careers, but specifically women's careers, and this is somewhat, I think, directed at Joan for your observation. So something that really struck me that I learned at Hope Funds, 2 of the most famous scientists, not just women scientists, but scientists, period, in the world. The mentor of Johanna Withers, Dr. Joan Stites, and a former Hope Funds honoree and SAB member, the late Janet Rowley. Both told the same story about when they got into science, something that they did, that they pursued scientific investigation in an area that was at the time less popular, and the men weren't pursuing it. So it was sort of this wide open field for them, obviously. And as all of you know, Joan Stites pursued investigation of non-coding RNA. And she worked with Watson and kind of everybody who mattered. And she is, I have friends who refer to her as the queen of RNA, and she really is. And then of course, Janet Rowley, the work that she did, led to what is essentially a cure for chronic myelogenous leukemia. I mean, one of the best contributions, the most profound contributions that we've seen to the field. And they largely did it because at that time, it's what they needed to do. So that's not true anymore. I hear, I'm sorry, my mask won't stay on when I'm talking. For instance, Alessandra is talking about working in condensates, which to my knowledge is right on the leading edge of where we are right now in science. And the men certainly aren't keeping her out, or she's not letting them. So Jill, when you think about this now, as things have changed over time with the type of opportunities that are now open to women, how would you guide them? Would you say still look at some of those roads less traveled, or just charge right out there in the areas that the men are more competitive in pursuing? Or maybe you do both, or something in between?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. I mean, I definitely have heard many women say that they tend to avoid those really competitive areas of science because they just don't enjoy the competition, and that they, you know, they enjoy more having opening up a new area of research. That's a really tough question to answer. I tend to be one of those that likes to avoid the competition, but I mean, you know, maybe that's an advantage to have that attitude, because you may be more likely to open up a new area. I think especially, I think, you know, if you look at really high tech areas of the even biological sciences, you tend to see more males in that than females. And I think, you know, often they're more biological conceptual questions are being asked by women. I do wonder if that might have something to do with it. It's a really interesting point. I think you're right. There isn't an answer. You just follow your gut, and, you know, basically, if that's a kind of question you want to ask, there's absolutely no reason not to address it. But then it might be kind of an interesting point that finding an area where it's not as crowded and competitive may be a good thing for science. I don't know.
Thank you.
So I'm just going to check here if there are any questions in the audience. And if someone in the audience would like to ask a question, you can hit the participants button and raise your hand. And at the moment, I'm not seeing any questions. Joan, Johanna, Camille, and Alessandra, this was a great conversation. Thank you so much for being a part of it. And thank you to all the supporters of Hope Funds, especially Morgan Stanley for the corporate underwriting of this event. And thank you for participating.
Thank you so much.
Thank you
Thank you for organizing it.
All right. Thanks so much. Take care.
Bye-bye.
Bye. You too.